Nick C. In Scientology, staffers and Sea Org members get paid a pittance. Yet some of them, for example, salespeople selling high-level services or the management types, see large amounts of money floating right past them. Have you ever experienced or witnessed any resentment over this? As in, the church isn't broke, so why am I? If not, why not? Are people simply conditioned to believe that all the money is going towards saving the planet, or is it something else? Oh, Nick. Oh, the jar you have opened here. The Pandora's box of attitudes and resentments that simmer right below the surface in Scientology with the Sea Org and the staff. This is a great question because nobody's really ever asked me about this before, but it drives a lot of Scientology behavior. Back in the 70s, in fact, was the first time I ever caught wind of some kind of resentment and jealousy towards very successful Scientologists by the Sea Org and other staff, Class 5 org staff, who resented the hell out of the missions. This is the first place I saw where this sort of thing was manifest. And the missions were very successful in the 1970s. I'm talking about the California missions, especially those from the San Francisco Bay Area, Davis area, all the way down to San Diego, Orange County, and the Los Angeles area, which is where I grew up. And I was a little rugrat running around in those very successful missions. I was there. And they were busy. There were a lot of people there. I don't have tons of memories, but I got some. And everybody dressed well. The place looked good. It was, it wasn't just a bunch of, the missions were not ratty furniture, folding tables with cracks in them and folding chairs. The missions made some money and they invested it right back into what they were doing. And the people who ran those missions, there's a few people, these very top flight mission holders, really had a business sense for what Scientology's potential was, and they were profiting on it, and they were profiting handsomely. And they were also flowing 10% to the church every week. So Hubbard was getting a taste of this, as was Scientology management. But it was only 10%. And these places were really flourishing to the point where they didn't even want to send people to the local orgs because the orgs looked like shit. The LA org, the Los Angeles org back then was a hole in the wall and it looked awful. It smelled bad. People didn't want to go, from a nice mission, air-conditioned, carpeted, nice rooms, comfortable to get your auditing in, to do your training in, and then get shuffled off to this hole in the wall, crappy place where supposedly, according to the works of L. Ron Hubbard, this crap-ass place, LA Org, is supposed to be so much better than the missions that they came from, right? And it didn't reflect that at all. But people put up with it because Scientology, and at the end of the day, it is a destructive cult with a authoritarian dogma, and people have to comply. And they condition themselves to do so. But here's where I'm going with all this. That's the picture. And so the Sea Org is looking at these successful missions. The staff are looking at these successful missions. And these missions are not being run on a daily basis by telex, by phone, the same way the orgs and the Sea Org are running. In other words, to the degree that the management is hands-off and just lets these people get on with it, the more successful Scientology is. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what the picture's supposed to look like. And it pissed off everybody above the level of the missions because they were jealous of that success. And they thought, we should be having that success. We should be having that money. We should be getting all those benefits. We should be getting all those bonuses. And they weren't getting any of it. And they hated those missions for it. And that was part of the setup as to why it was that the whole mission network got taken down and why you didn't see a whole bunch of staff and Sea Org members up in arms about it. They were like, yeah, about time those missions get their due, right? Now, not universally, of course. There was tons of protest. In fact, there's a very interesting letter published on Saturday's Tony Ortega's blog yesterday that laid out some ideas that some people had about what was going on back then. But anyway, within the organization, a lot of resentment. And from that point forward, that kind of attitude never really went to the missions, but it would manifest in my experience with Scientology, especially as a staff and then Sea Org member. I was in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is a pretty affluent area, and there were some very rich Scientologists there, as well as middle-class Scientologists and a few on the lower end of the scale, who usually ended up joining staff or were sort of transient in and out. So the successful people, the guys who lived out in Hope Ranch, this was the Duggins, this was Reed Slatkin and his family, these types, big money people. We resented them, but we also relied on them, right? We needed them because they were paying our mortgage payments, they were paying our rent payments, and we were in a building that was way too expensive for us. So we kind of had a little bit of a love-hate relationship with these guys, right? Especially over time as you start, really resenting the experience as a staff member of not having any money, living in a hole-in-the-wall apartment, barely making ends meet, doing all this work to save mankind. And here's these people who seem to have cush jobs, doing not a whole lot, and making bank, right? And you're like, how's this supposed to work? This is just unfair. And at that point in my life, it was sort of shake my fist at the fates. I didn't know who else to blame. I mean, how could I blame them for it? But I kind of did, kind of had some resentment towards that. And then as a Sea Org member, it was no holds barred. Behind closed doors, all these affluent Scientologists, these people who've got money, fuck them. They need to give all of it to us. We are owed that money, and not individually, but the Sea Org, the cause. The Sea Org is about fanaticism, and I don't know that I've really used that word enough in connection with what that group is about. You have people, myself included when I was part of it, who are in a headspace where Scientology can really, as a movement, as a cause, and really as a structure, as an organization, it really can't do any wrong. It is the most important thing in the world. There isn't anything else going on that means more than what we're doing. So all of you Scientologists out there who've got all that money, that are out there leading these cush lives, watching your TV, going bowling, going to the horse races, those are two examples from a Hubbard policy letter. But Hubbard actually talked about this. He called it dilettantism. He said these people who are part-time in Scientology, who only engage in it like as though it's a women's sewing circle, ask them what they do on their nights off, bowling, horse racing. Like, this is what Hubbard said, right? So we would use this as justification to resent these people and put more pressure on them, because clearly we're working our guts out 24/7. The least they can do is give us all their money. And when they wouldn't, or they would hold off or hold out or pretend they didn't have money, we would just, you scum-sucking lowlife, right? Here we are working our guts out. All you got to do is pay us. I mean, it's the least you can do. This was the attitude that we had, and we would talk about this openly, again, behind closed doors. When you're dealing with the public as a salesperson, which I did for a while as a reg, or as any other kind of, direct contact point with the public, you are all smiles, very manners, very etiquette, very yes, we love you, you're wonderful, we very, very much need you. And here's the crazy thing is, as a fanatic, both of those things could be in your head at the exact same moment, and you can reconcile them, despite the fact that these two attitudes of love and hate towards this public seem mutually exclusive, but they weren't. They actually kind of formed this sort of meshy view of the public as people who weren't good enough or willing to be responsible enough to be on staff or join the Sea Org, but their contribution, therefore, was going to be money, and they were going to pay, and we were going to make them pay. And we did not have any qualms about taking their money, because we were the ones who were actually doing the work, and all they had to do was shell out a few bucks. So in our eyes, they pretty much owed us. And that was kind of how that worked, at least for me and people around me, because I wasn't alone in this. This isn't just my own private thoughts. We talked about this stuff. Okay, so yeah, so are people simply conditioned to believe that all the money is going towards saving the planet? Yes, we were. When it came to money flowing past us, eventually this resentment over years and years of time in the Sea Org just sort of solidified into this sort of mass attitude I had. And I sort of turned that resentment into a kind of, I don't know the word for it. I'm searching for the word right now. I maybe I should have thought of this first, but um, it was sort of this attitude of I don't care. Like, okay, it doesn't matter. I don't. Yeah, I just sort of reversed it. I sort of tried to flip the script on the significance or importance of money in my head. And I'm sure there's some term for this in terms of psychological mechanisms, but that's the best way I know how to describe it. To the point, and you're going to laugh at this because I sure do. I cannot believe how ridiculous I was. But as a Sea Org member, I would openly sit down with public from time to time and tell them, money. I convinced myself that money was easy to get because look at all these people who are getting it and we're taking it from them, right? So I convinced myself that it was easy to get. And I would tell people, public Scientologists, when I was doing ethics handlings with them, or I was, having to somehow discipline them, I would say to them when they would talk about their money problems, I'd say, man, if it's a matter of ability. You got to do Scientology so you're more able. So you're able to open up your flows. You're able to do more work in less units of time. You're able to be more effective with the time that you invest. And I truly believed as a Sea Org member at this point, and this was deep into my Sea Org experience. This was after a lot of stuff. This was even after the RPF. I still maintain these attitudes. And I would tell the public straight up in a one-on-one, man, if I was you, if I was out in the real world, I wouldn't call it the real world. I'd call it the WOG world, right? I said, if I was out in the WOG world like you, I'd be making bank. I'd be making so much money. It'd be easy. The fact that you're having trouble just tells me that you're just not being effective in your actions and you need to deal with that. So let's go and start applying some Scientology. And then I'd start raking them over the coals, that way. This wasn't all the time. I didn't deal with everybody this way, but if I felt that the person was holding out or being silly or stupid or something, and I thought that a lot as a Scientologist, as a Sea Org member, then I would give them the what for, and I would say stuff like that. And I look back on that now, and I just can't believe how ridiculous that is. That I was in a fantasy world, total fantasy world. But I really thought that was true, right? And of course, now that I'm out in the real world, I know that I was completely out of touch with reality. So anyway, that's there's a lot of thoughts there about that question, Nick. But that was a good one. I thought there was a lot to talk about there, and I hope that gives a sort of picture of the culture of Scientology and the Sea Org and how we sort of thought about money in public and stuff. And how that resentment actually had, from a sort of Scientology cultural point of view, right? Sort of if you look at the caste system and how it works, how that had long-term consequences. Taking out the mission network basically destroyed Scientology. It's just been taking a long time for it to die ever since then. That was really the apex. That was the zenith of Scientology, was that time. And it's been on a steady downward trend since. So there you go.